People have been telling you this your entire adult life. You walk into a room and someone assumes you're 10 years younger than you are. You mention your age and people do a double take. Colleagues who started the same year as you look like they've lived through a war, while something in your face still carries a quality that people can't quite name. They call it good genes. They call it luck. But Carl Jung would have called it something else entirely. He would have said your face is telling the truth about what's happening inside your psyche. And what's happening inside your psyche is fundamentally different from what's happening inside almost everyone else's. Jung identified specific configurations of personality so uncommon that most people would never encounter another one in their daily lives. And he noticed something about these rare types that had nothing to do with their ideas or their emotional depth or their strange way of moving through the world. He noticed they aged differently, not just psychologically, visibly. Something about the way their consciousness operated seemed to preserve a quality in them that the years stripped from almost everyone else. This wasn't vanity, and it wasn't genetics. Jung traced it to something far more interesting. He found that the very traits that made these personality types feel alien in their own lives, the traits that isolated them, confused them, made them question whether something was fundamentally wrong with them, were the same traits protecting them from the specific psychological forces that age most people from the inside out. The thing that made them different was the thing keeping them young, and they had no idea it was happening. Today I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about why certain rare personality types resist aging in ways that go far beyond skin deep. The specific psychological mechanisms that preserve youthfulness in people who live primarily from their inner world, and why the very qualities you've been told to fix about yourself might be the ones keeping you more alive than the people telling you to change. You first have to understand what ages people, not biologically, psychologically. Because Jung discovered that psychological aging and physical aging are far more connected than anyone wanted to admit. The body doesn't just deteriorate on its own neutral timeline. It deteriorates in relationship to what the psyche is carrying. And what most people's psyches are carrying by the time they hit 30 is staggering. Jung identified the primary mechanism of psychological aging as chronic persona maintenance. The persona, in Jung's framework, is the mask you wear in public. The version of yourself you've constructed to be acceptable, successful, likable, normal. Everyone has a persona. It's necessary for social functioning. But Jung discovered that in most people, the persona doesn't stay a tool, it becomes a prison. By adulthood, the average person is spending so much psychological energy maintaining their mask that the maintenance itself becomes the dominant activity of their psyche. Think about what this actually requires. You wake up and immediately begin performing. Performing competence at work, performing happiness in your marriage, performing patience with your children, performing confidence in social settings, performing interest in conversations that bore you, performing agreement with opinions you don't share. Every interaction requires you to suppress what's actually happening inside and project what's expected instead. And this suppression isn't free. It costs energy. Enormous, constant, grinding energy that accumulates over years and decades. This chronic performance literally wears people down, not metaphorically. He watched patients age visibly during periods of intense persona maintenance, periods where the gap between who they actually were and who they were pretending to be grew wider. Their faces hardened, their eyes dimmed, something vital drained out of their expression and was replaced by a kind of competent exhaustion that most people mistake for simple aging. But it wasn't aging. It was the accumulated cost of decades of pretending. Here's where rare personality types diverge from this pattern. Jung identified certain psychological configurations, particularly those dominated by introverted intuition and introverted feeling, that are constitutionally incapable of sustaining heavy persona maintenance. Not because they're more honest or more evolved, because their psyche is oriented inward so fundamentally that pouring energy outward into performance feels like trying to breathe underwater. They can do it in short bursts, but they cannot sustain it the way most people do. Their nervous system rebels, their energy collapses, something in them refuses, and this refusal, which these types usually experience as a flaw, as social incompetence, as evidence that something is wrong with them, turns out to be profoundly protective. Because every moment they're not maintaining a heavy persona is a moment their psyche is conserving the energy that persona maintenance devours in everyone else. They're not spending their life force on performance, which means their life force is available for something else entirely. Jung found that in these rare types, the energy that most people burn on social masks gets redirected inward, toward reflection, toward processing, toward the deep inner work that Jung called individuation, the process of becoming genuinely yourself rather than a collection of adaptations designed to make other people comfortable. And individuation, Jung discovered, has a relationship with aging that no one expected. People undergoing genuine individuation don't just change psychologically. Something in their physical presence shifts. Jung described it as a quality of aliveness that doesn't diminish with years the way it does in people living primarily through their persona. The eyes stay clear. The face retains mobility and expressiveness. There's a softness that doesn't harden into the rigid mask that settles over most faces by middle age. Not because they're avoiding life, because they're actually living it, from the inside, where it counts, rather than from the surface where everyone performs. This is what people are seeing when they tell you that you look younger than your age. They're not seeing good genetics. They're seeing the visible evidence of a psyche that refused to calcify into performance. A face that still moves because the person behind it is still moving, still becoming, still engaged in the inner work that most people abandoned decades ago in favor of just getting through the day. But Jung went deeper than this. He recognized that the youthful quality in rare personality types wasn't just about what they avoided, it was about what they maintained. Specifically, a connection to something he studied extensively and that most adults lose access to entirely: the living relationship with the unconscious. Children are naturally connected to the unconscious. They live in a world where imagination and reality overlap, where symbols carry meaning, where play and curiosity aren't luxuries, but primary modes of engaging with existence. And this connection gives children a quality that everyone recognizes, but no one can quite define: aliveness, presence, that particular brightness in the eyes that dims in most people somewhere between adolescence and settling into adult responsibility. Jung found that this dimming isn't inevitable. It happens because most people, as they build their adult persona, wall off access to the unconscious in order to function in the rational, performance-driven world. They stop playing, stop wondering, stop listening to the strange, irrational, symbolic language rising from inside them. They dismiss dreams as noise. They ignore intuitions as impractical. They replace curiosity with competence and wonder with efficiency. And something in their face dies. Something that was alive when they were young goes dark. But rare personality types, the ones dominated by introverted intuition, introverted feeling, or deep intuitive perception, never fully wall off the unconscious. They can't. Their psyche is configured to maintain that channel whether they want it open or not. Dreams still speak to them in their 40s. Symbols still carry weight in their 50s. Curiosity still drives them in their 60s. Something in them refuses to stop wondering, refuses to accept that the visible world is all there is, refuses to trade imagination for pure pragmatism. This refusal preserves the very quality that makes children look alive. Not childishness, not immaturity, the specific brightness that comes from a psyche still in active relationship with the deeper layers of consciousness. Jung would have said these people retain what he called the archetypal connection, the living bridge between conscious awareness and the vast symbolic world underneath. And that connection keeps something in them perpetually fresh in a way that people who've severed it simply cannot replicate, no matter how many skin treatments they buy. This is the paradox that confuses everyone who meets you. You feel ancient inside. You carry the weight of perception, of awareness, of seeing things most people are blind to. You felt old since you were a child, but your face tells a different story, because your face reflects the other truth. That something in you stayed alive, stayed open, stayed connected to the source that most people sealed off decades ago in exchange for the ability to perform normalcy without disturbance. And speaking of that inner work, that process of staying connected to who you actually are beneath the noise of expectation, if you've been feeling the pull to go deeper into understanding yourself through a Jungian lens, we created something for exactly that. It's called True Self-Discovery, and it contains 24 practical reflection exercises drawn from Jung's teachings, each one designed to help you find your way within. You can click below to get it. Now, let's keep going, because what Jung discovered next about this phenomenon goes even further than most people realize. Jung also identified a counterintuitive relationship between shadow work and youthfulness that explains another dimension of why rare types age differently. Shadow work, facing the parts of yourself that you've rejected, denied, and buried, is brutally difficult. Most people avoid it entirely. They spend their lives maintaining the illusion that they're only their good qualities, only generous, only kind, only patient. And the energy required to keep the shadow suppressed is enormous. He compared this suppression to carrying an invisible weight. You can't see it. The person carrying it often can't identify it, but it's there, pressing down, compressing the spine of the psyche, aging the entire system under pressure it can't name. People who refuse their shadow, who insist on being only light, develop a particular kind of aging, a tightness around the eyes, a rigidity in the jaw, a quality of strained pleasantness that looks more like a held breath than a genuine expression. Their face becomes the mask, because the mask is all they'll allow to exist. Rare personality types, because of their relationship with the unconscious, tend to encounter their shadow whether they want to or not. The channel that stays open to intuition, dreams, and symbolic awareness is the same channel through which shadow material surfaces. They can't avoid it the way people with more externally oriented psyches can. Their own darkness shows up in their dreams, in their moods, in the uncomfortable truths that rise without invitation during quiet moments. And while this makes their lives significantly more psychologically demanding, it also means they're integrating material that most people spend their lives running from. People who integrated their shadow, who acknowledged their capacity for selfishness, anger, manipulation, pettiness, who faced these qualities honestly instead of pretending they didn't exist, developed a particular quality he described as psychological completeness. And this completeness manifested physically. Their faces relaxed because they weren't holding anything in rigid suppression. Their expressions became more fluid because they had access to the full range of human emotion rather than only the socially acceptable ones. They looked younger because they weren't spending energy keeping half of themselves imprisoned. This is one of the deepest paradoxes of aging. The people who appear most youthful are often the ones who face the most darkness. Not because suffering preserves you, but because the willingness to face what's difficult, to integrate what's uncomfortable, to acknowledge the full spectrum of who you are, releases the pressure that ages everyone who refuses to look. The weight lifts when you stop pretending it's not there. And when the weight lifts, something in the face opens again. Something that's been clenched for years finally lets go. There's another layer to this that Jung explored in his work on the puer aeternus, the eternal youth archetype. Jung noticed that certain people carried this archetype strongly, and he was careful to distinguish between its healthy and unhealthy manifestations. In its shadow form, the puer creates someone who refuses to grow up, who avoids commitment, responsibility, and the demands of adult life, who stays perpetually adolescent, not because they're vital, but because they're afraid. This is the version most people associate with appearing young, and it's not what's happening in the rare personality types Jung studied. The healthy manifestation of the puer is entirely different. It's the preservation of genuine vitality, openness, and creative energy within a fully adult psyche. Jung found this most often in people who'd done significant individuation work, people who had accepted the responsibilities of adulthood while refusing to let those responsibilities kill the part of them that wondered, imagined, and remained curious about existence. They weren't avoiding growing up. They'd grown up completely while keeping something alive that most adults sacrifice in the process. This distinction matters because rare personality types often get accused of exactly the shadow version. People look at their youthful quality and assume they're immature, that they haven't faced real life, that they're living in a fantasy world while serious people do serious things and age appropriately. And this accusation can be devastating because these types have usually faced more inner difficulty by 30 than most people face in a lifetime. They've confronted shadows, navigated psychological complexity, processed emotional material that would overwhelm most people. They're not young-looking because they've avoided life. They're young-looking because they've engaged with life at a depth that preserved something most people lost. Jung saw yet another mechanism protecting these types from accelerated aging, one that connects to how they process experience itself. Most people process life events externally. Something happens, they react, they move on to the next thing. The experience passes through them like water through a sieve. There's no deep integration, no real metabolizing of what occurred, just a series of events stacking on top of each other, creating weight without wisdom. Rare personality types process experience differently. They metabolize it. An experience doesn't just happen to them and pass. It enters them and gets turned over, examined, felt from every angle, integrated into their understanding of themselves and the world. This is exhausting, which is why these types need so much solitude and recovery time. But it means that experience doesn't accumulate as unprocessed weight. It gets digested, transformed into understanding, converted from raw event into genuine wisdom. And Jung noticed that this metabolic processing had a visible effect. People who truly process their experiences carry them differently than people who just accumulate them. There's a lightness that comes from having digested your life rather than just survived it. The eyes of someone who has genuinely processed their grief look completely different from the eyes of someone who has buried it. Both might have experienced the same loss, but one face carries the weight of suppression, while the other carries the depth of integration. And depth doesn't age you the way weight does. This is why you can feel so heavy inside while looking so light outside. You carry depth, but you don't carry accumulation. You've processed what most people have merely stored. And the processing releases the very pressure that carves deep lines of tension into the faces of people who refuse to feel what they were carrying. Your face isn't young because your life has been easy. Your face is young because you did the brutal work of actually feeling your life instead of just enduring it. Jung also connected this youthful quality to something he observed about creative energy. Rare personality types tend to maintain active creative engagement with life far longer than most people. Not necessarily artistic creativity, though that's common, but the deeper creativity of meaning-making, of seeing patterns, of generating new understanding, of approaching existence as something to be explored rather than merely managed. Jung believed that creative energy was directly connected to the life force itself. People who stopped creating, stopped exploring, stopped engaging with life as a creative act, experienced a kind of energetic death that preceded physical death by decades. They were still alive, but something essential had shut down. And that shutdown was visible in their posture, their expression, the quality of their presence. They looked older because something in them had already stopped being fully alive. Rare personality types resist this shutdown because their inner orientation keeps generating new material, new insights, new connections, new questions, new ways of understanding themselves and the world. The inner life doesn't stop producing, which means the creative energy doesn't stop flowing. And that flow, that continuous engagement with living as a creative, meaning-making act, preserves a vitality that people who stopped creating lost long ago. So what does all of this mean for you? If you're someone who's been told you look younger than your years while simultaneously feeling older, more tired, and more burdened than anyone around you, Jung would want you to understand something important. These aren't contradictory experiences. They're two sides of the same psychological reality. You feel old because your inner life is demanding, because you've been processing, integrating, confronting, and metabolizing experience at a depth that most people never reach. Because you carry awareness that weighs heavily in a world that rewards unconsciousness. Because seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable blindness is exhausting in ways that people without your perception will never understand. But you look young because that very depth has protected you from the forces that age everyone else. The chronic performance, the severed connection to the unconscious, the unprocessed accumulation of suppressed experience, the creative death that comes from reducing life to management rather than meaning. You escaped these things not because you were lucky, but because your psyche wouldn't let you fall into them. Your very configuration as a rare personality type made it impossible to sustain the patterns that destroy most people from the inside. And here's what Jung would want you to sit with. This quality is not something to dismiss or be embarrassed about. People who look younger than their years in the way Jung described, not through avoidance of life, but through deep engagement with it, are carrying visible evidence of psychological work that most people will never do. Your face is a record of every shadow you faced, every experience you metabolized, every moment you chose depth over performance, every time your psyche refused to abandon its connection to the living unconscious, even when that connection made your life harder. The people around you who aged faster aren't wrong or lesser. They made different psychological choices, often unconsciously. They invested in the persona and lost the connection to what was underneath. They accumulated experience without metabolizing it. They performed consistency while sacrificing aliveness, and the cost shows. Not because aging is punishment, but because the body reflects what the psyche carries. It always has. Your youthful quality will confuse people for your entire life. They'll attribute it to genetics, to luck, to the assumption that you've somehow had it easier. Very few will understand that it's the evidence of having had it harder in the ways that matter. That the inner difficulty, the relentless processing, the refusal to perform at the cost of authenticity, the ongoing relationship with parts of consciousness that most people sealed off before they turned 25, is what preserved the quality they're noticing. Jung believed that the psyche writes itself on the body more honestly than most people want to acknowledge. That your face, your eyes, your physical presence tells the truth about what's happening inside whether you want it to or not. And for rare personality types, the truth it tells is this. Something in you stayed alive when it died in almost everyone around you. Something refused to close. Something insisted on remaining open, curious, connected, real. That quality has cost you enormously. In isolation, in being misunderstood, in the exhaustion of maintaining an inner life that never stops generating material to be processed, in the loneliness of perceiving depth in a world obsessed with surface. You've paid for every year that doesn't show on your face with years of inner work that no one saw or acknowledged. But you kept it. Whatever that quality is, that brightness, that openness, that particular aliveness that makes people look twice and wonder how old you actually are, you kept it. Not by avoiding life, by living it so deeply that the depth itself became a kind of preservation, by refusing to trade your inner world for a more comfortable outer performance, by staying in relationship with the parts of your psyche that most people abandon the moment adulthood demanded they choose between authenticity and acceptance. This quality isn't accidental, and it isn't trivial. It's the visible signature of a psyche that chose wholeness over conformity, even when conformity was easier, even when wholeness was lonely, even when everyone around you seemed to be aging into a kind of comfortable deadness that you couldn't bring yourself to accept, no matter how much simpler it would have made your life. You look younger because something in you is still alive, still becoming, still unfinished in the best possible way. And in a world full of people who finished becoming decades ago and have been slowly hardening ever since, that unfinished aliveness is the rarest thing you carry. Protect it. Not because it keeps you looking young, because it keeps you being real. And being real, in Jung's view, was the entire point of a life. If you haven't yet, we put together a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's teachings, built to help you go further into the inner work that's already kept something essential alive in you. Click below to get it.